Long before anyone carved pumpkins or whispered the word Halloween, humanity already shared a single emotion that crossed oceans and languages: fear of the unknown. The fear of the dead, of spirits unseen but always near. It is a fear older than history itself, and it shaped rituals, religions, and civilizations on every continent. This is the true story of how ancient people, from the Celts of Europe to the Aztecs of the Americas, from the Chinese emperors to the tribes of Africa, created their own languages of terror to make peace with death. Over 2,000 years ago, in the misty hills of Ireland and Scotland, the Celts gathered for one of their most sacred nights, Samhain, pronounced Samhain. It was held on the last day of October, marking the end of harvest and the beginning of winter, the season when the world turned cold, dark, and lifeless. To them, this turning point was no ordinary date. It was a doorway, a night when the boundary between the living and the dead dissolved, and the spirits could cross freely. Fires blazed on hilltops as druids, Celtic priests, lead rituals to honor the gods and protect their people from restless souls. Families left offerings of food and drink outside their homes, hoping to appease wandering ghosts. Some wore animal skins or masks, disguising themselves so that spirits would not recognize them. It was both a festival and a defense, an ancient attempt to control forces that could never be truly tamed. Far to the south, across the Mediterranean, the Romans practiced their own rituals of remembrance. One such day was Feralia, held in late October, when Romans honored the spirits of their ancestors. Families visited graves, offered wine and garlands, and prayed that the dead would rest in peace. But Rome also had another festival that shaped the language of the supernatural: Lemuria, celebrated in May. During Lemuria, Romans believed the dead could return to haunt the living if not properly appeased. An ancient Roman man walking barefoot inside his dark house at midnight, wearing a white tunic, holding black beans in his hand, throwing them behind him while whispering prayers. The room is lit by a small oil lamp. With these beans, I redeem me and mine. It was said that the ghosts gathered the beans and departed, satisfied. These rituals, practical and symbolic, reveal a truth echoed across every civilization: that humanity has always sought to negotiate with death. Even earlier, in ancient Egypt, the relationship with the dead was more formal, a system built on cosmic balance. Egyptians did not fear the dead in the same way. They revered them. Death was not the end, but a journey into the afterlife, a continuation of existence under the watchful eyes of the gods. During the annual Feast of the Valley, families crossed the Nile from Thebes to visit the tombs of their ancestors, bringing food, flowers, and music. They believed the spirits of the dead joined the living in feasting that night. The line between life and death blurred, but not in fear, in celebration of eternal order. Still, Egypt's fascination with death gave rise to some of history's most haunting imagery: mummies, tomb curses, and shadowy guardians like Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming. To the Egyptians, these were not legends of horror, but of respect. Yet millennia later, when archaeologists uncovered tombs and whispered about curses, the old Egyptian reverence transformed in the Western mind into terror. A reminder that one culture's faith can become another's nightmare. On the other side of the world, across jungles and oceans, the Aztecs of ancient Mesoamerica also built their world around death. Long before Spanish colonization, they honored Mictocosayadel, the Lady of the Dead, who ruled over Mictel, the underworld. Every year, Aztec families created altars adorned with skulls, candles, and food, inviting the spirits of their ancestors to visit. This festival lasted an entire month and coincided with the fall harvest, a time when life and death intertwined. The Spanish conquistadors, upon arriving in the 16th century, were horrified by the skulls and rituals. But beneath the surface was a philosophy remarkably similar to Samhain, that death was not to be hidden, but welcomed and respected. Centuries later, this ritual would evolve into Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead. But its heart was always ancient, a dialogue between the living and those who came before. In ancient China, long before the rise of empires, communities feared the hungry ghosts, restless spirits who wandered because their descendants had neglected them. Over time, these beliefs crystallized into the Ghost Festival, held during the 7th lunar month. People left offerings of food, burned incense, and floated lanterns on rivers to guide the lost souls back to peace. The earliest records of this festival date to the Han Dynasty, over 2,000 years ago. Chinese cosmology taught that the living and the dead existed in a delicate balance. If one side was ignored, misfortune followed. Thus, terror was not born of monsters or demons, but from the guilt of neglect, the fear that one's ancestors might suffer in the dark. The Chinese language of terror was moral, not monstrous. In Japan, ancient Shinto and Buddhist beliefs created another bridge between worlds, the Obon Festival. As early as the 8th century, Japanese families believed that once a year, ancestral spirits returned home to visit their relatives. To guide them, lanterns were hung at doors, and at the festival's end, lanterns were floated down rivers to send the spirits back. It was a time of reverence, but also unease, a reminder that the invisible world was always near. Over centuries, Japan's love of ghost stories, or kaiden, turned those same ancestral fears into tales of vengeance and sorrow, from the ghostly Ure, pale women in white, to the tormented Onryo seeking justice. Each story was a cultural echo of the same ancient instinct, that the dead still have something to say. In Africa, traditions of ancestor veneration run deep, predating recorded history. Among the Yoruba people of West Africa, masked dancers called Agungan embodied the spirits of the dead during festivals. Clad in layers of cloth and adorned with talismans, they whirled through the streets, speaking in voices altered by ritual. The living do not see a performer. They see the ancestor returned. The Agungan serve as moral guides, bringing blessings or warnings to the community. In these ceremonies, fear and respect blend together, a reminder that forgetting the dead is the greatest danger of all. Across the continent, from the Dogon of Mali to the Zulu of South Africa, death was never seen as absence. It was presence, sometimes benevolent, sometimes haunting. To them, spirits were not horror, they were history. Meanwhile, in ancient Greece, death had its own vocabulary. The Greeks believed that after death, souls traveled to the underworld ruled by Hades. Festivals like Anthesperia, dedicated to Dionysus, invited the spirits of the dead to roam among the living. Families sealed their homes with tar and chewed blackthorn to protect themselves. When the festival ended, they drove the spirits away by shouting, "Out, you can't! The Anthesteria is over." Fear of the dead, respect for them, and the desire to control their influence, all these threads wove through Greek culture, and later Roman religion, shaping Europe's understanding of ghosts, demons, and the afterlife for centuries. Even in the vast reaches of the ancient Near East, among the Mesopotamians and Babylonians, there were festivals for the dead. The Mesopotamian Kispam was a monthly ritual in which offerings of bread and beer were made to deceased relatives. The dead were believed to need nourishment just as the living did. If neglected, they could return as Edamu, restless spirits bringing illness or madness. Cuneiform tablets describe priests reciting incantations to calm these spirits, echoing a worldview that fear itself was part of the sacred order. Across continents, these rituals developed independently, yet they shared the same language, a balance between reverence and terror. Fire, food, masks, and light, these were humanity's first tools to negotiate with the unknown. Each culture used them differently, but the meaning was identical. The dead must be honored, remembered, and sometimes feared. In Northern Europe, as the centuries passed, Samhain survived, even as Christianity spread. Pagan fires gave way to prayers, and offerings turned into alms for the poor. By the early Middle Ages, the Church transformed the old festival into All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. The intention was to Christianize the ancient rhythms of death and harvest, but beneath the hymns, the whispers of Samhain remained. The people still believed that souls wandered at night, that unseen eyes watched from the dark fields. They still carved lanterns, not yet from pumpkins, but from turnips, to light the way for travelers, and perhaps to frighten off ghosts. This fusion of ancient Celtic belief and medieval Christianity would become the seed of Halloween's later form. But at its heart, it was still the same ritual humans had practiced for millennia, standing between worlds, holding light against the dark. From the banks of the Nile to the jungles of Mesoamerica, from the steppes of China to the highlands of Ireland, ancient civilizations invented different names for the same thing. The night when the living and the dead meet, they sang, they danced, they burned offerings, they wept, and they told stories. Each ritual was a map of human fear, tracing the same truth, that death is not the opposite of life, but part of it. Perhaps that is why the imagery of death, skulls, fire, masks, shadows persists even now. These were the symbols through which our ancestors made sense of existence. They didn't celebrate horror for pleasure, as we might today. They celebrated it to survive. The rituals of Samhain, Ferelia, Lemuria, Oban, Kispam, and the Agungan were all acts of remembrance, not rebellion. In confronting death, they kept life sacred. So when we look back across thousands of years, we see that Halloween is not an invention of any one culture. It is a translation, a survival of countless ancient languages of fear and faith. Each civilization spoke it in its own tongue, but the meaning was always shared. Honor the dead, respect the unseen, and never forget that light exists only because of the dark. Because from the first fires of the Druids to the incense of the Han, from the chants of the Yoruba to the songs of the Aztecs, humanity has always known one truth, that on certain nights the distance between this world and the next grows thin. And when it does, we light candles, wear masks, and tell stories, not just to keep the ghosts away, but to remember that we, too, will one day join them. If you enjoyed this journey through Mystery Vault, make sure to subscribe and join us for more mysteries of history and the world around us.